Okay, so we're diving into part 4 of How to Human. This is communication and listening.
Yeah, and I love this section. It's not just about giving you a bunch of hard and fast rules, but it's more of a guide, a compass.
Right. I mean, this is How to Human, right?
Right.
So it's all about navigating these complex human things. And, well, communication is pretty fundamental.
For sure. And this section is really packed with useful insights about, connecting with people effectively. Like
Yeah.
someone just laid out all their wisdom on a page for you to benefit from.
Exactly. And I think the big takeaway here is that communication, it goes so much deeper than just saying words.
Right.
It's about, yeah, expressing yourself clearly, but it's also about actively listening
Yes.
and really trying to understand and interpret what the other person is saying. And it's not just about the words, right?
Right.
It's about the context. It's about the tone. It's about all those unspoken things.
The nonverbal cues. Like when
Yeah.
you're talking to someone, are they making eye contact with you?
Yeah, exactly.
Are they fidgeting? What are their arms doing?
And how about, on the listening side, it's not just passively hearing. It's about being present. It's about processing what the other person is saying
Yeah.
and responding thoughtfully.
Right. So often we just hear noise, right? We don't actually listen.
And that's where things can go wrong really quickly.
For sure.
And what's so cool about this section, too, is that it really drives home how these two skills, speaking and listening, how much they impact every single part of your life.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's relationships or work or even just, resolving conflicts or learning.
Everything.
These skills are so essential.
Hmm.
And that's why I think this is so important to talk about, because think about it. How many times have you had a misunderstanding with someone that just caused so much unnecessary friction?
Yeah, all the time.
Or you've been in a situation where you just felt like you weren't heard.
Oh, yeah.
Good communication, it's like the foundation for trust.
It's the foundation of intimacy.
It's the foundation for growth.
It's huge.
And without it, things get messy.
It's true.
Okay, so how about we start breaking down how to actually develop these skills? What are some of the first steps that we can take?
Well, the notes really emphasize being clear and intentional. It sounds simple, but you really need to know what you want to say before you even open your mouth.
Right, that makes sense.
It's about getting rid of vagueness. It's about not making assumptions.
Right, and that kind of leads into this idea of think before you speak, which, we've all heard that before.
Yeah.
But it's really about pausing, taking a moment, taking a beat to consider how your words are actually going to be received by the other person.
Yes, and just that moment of pause can be the difference between a successful interaction and a not so successful one.
100%.
Now, on the listening side, the notes talk about active listening techniques.
Okay.
So it's more than just, sitting there quietly while the other person talks. It's about really engaging with what they're saying.
Right, so not just being quiet, but actually showing that you're listening.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that might mean maintaining eye contact, nodding your head, using little nonverbal cues to show that you're present and engaged.
Okay, so things like making eye contact,
Yeah.
nodding, using body language to really show, hey, I'm here with you, I'm present.
Exactly.
What about, sometimes when you're listening to someone, it's so easy to get caught up in what you want to say next
Oh, yeah.
that you kind of stop listening.
You're already formulating that response in your head.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're not really present with what the other person is saying anymore.
Right. So how do you avoid doing that?
Well, one of the suggestions is to resist the urge to interrupt.
Right.
Yeah.
Even if you have like the most brilliant thing to say,
Yes.
you got to hold back.
Let them finish their thought. And then when they're done, you can share your brilliant insight.
Right. And that leads into another technique, right? Which is reflecting back what you've heard.
Yes.
So saying things like, okay, so what you're saying is,
Exactly. It's about confirming your understanding. And it shows the other person that you're really listening to them.
so it's not just parroting back what they said, it's showing that you've understood.
Exactly. And then another suggestion is to ask open-ended questions. So instead of just asking questions that have a yes or no answer,
Okay.
you're asking questions that encourage the other person to elaborate.
So to share more.
Right.
And then there's this thing called the wait rule, which I really like.
Oh, the wait rule is great. It's so simple, but so effective.
And it's basically just, taking a beat before you respond.
Right. Just a moment of pause
Yeah.
before you jump in with your thoughts. It really helps you to process what the other person has said.
And it prevents you from, having those knee-jerk reactions that we're all prone to.
Exactly.
It's like you're creating a little bit of space for yourself to be more thoughtful in your response.
It shifts the dynamic of the conversation from this rapid-fire exchange to a more thoughtful dialogue.
Yeah. And I love how the notes also talk about the 3 C's of communication. I think this is such a helpful framework. Can you break those down for us?
Okay, so the first C is clear,
Okay.
and that means making sure your message is precise and easy to understand. So you're not using any jargon, you're not beating around the bush, you're just saying what you mean in a way that the other person can easily grasp.
Straightforward and simple.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's clear. What about the second C?
The second C is concise.
Okay, concise. So getting to the point.
Exactly. You're saying what needs to be said without getting bogged down in unnecessary details. It's about respecting the other person's time and attention.
Right. I mean, we've all been in those conversations where someone just goes on and on and on, and you're just like, okay, can you just get to the point?
Exactly. And those conversations are not fun to be on either end of.
Right. And the third C.
The third C is compassionate.
Okay, compassionate.
So this one's about delivering your message with kindness and consideration for the other person's feelings.
It's not just what you say, but it's how you say it.
Exactly. You can say the same thing in many different ways,
And some ways are going to be more effective than others.
especially when you're dealing with sensitive topics or you're trying to resolve a conflict.
Compassion.
Yeah.
I feel like that is sometimes the missing ingredient, right?
Right.
People are so focused on, getting their point across
Yeah.
that they forget about the other person's feeling.
Like they forget to be kind.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the 3 C's. Now, what about some of the challenges that we might face when it comes to communication?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that can trip us up?
Well, one of the biggest challenges that comes up in the notes is this idea of listening to respond versus listening to understand.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It's so easy to get caught up in what you want to say next,
Yeah.
that you stop really listening to the other person.
You're just waiting for your turn to talk.
Exactly. And you miss out on so much of the nuance and the meaning of what they're actually trying to convey.
All right.
So the suggestion here is to really remind yourself that your goal is not to reply.
Your goal is to understand.
Right.
It's a subtle shift, but it can make a huge difference.
I think so too.
What about other challenges? I mean, there's got to be more, right?
Yeah, there's a lot. Another big one that the notes mention is misinterpretation.
Okay, misinterpretation.
This is especially common in our digital age, where so much of our communication is text-based.
Right, so things like emails, texts.
Exactly, because when you're communicating through text, you're missing out on all of those nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
The tone of voice, the facial expressions, the body language.
Yeah, all that stuff.
All those things that convey so much meaning.
And it's so easy to misread someone's tone in a text.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can write something and you can mean it in one way, but the person reading it might take it a completely different way.
Exactly.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
So what do we do about that?
Well, the notes suggest being really proactive about clarifying intent. So if you're not sure what someone means, just ask.
Okay.
You can say something like, hey, just to be sure I understand correctly, are you saying?
Okay.
And then paraphrase what you think they meant.
Right, just to make sure that you're both on the same page.
Exactly. And it might feel a little awkward at first, but it's so much better than having a huge misunderstanding down the line.
Right. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Definitely.
Okay, what about, emotions? Because I feel like emotions can really get in the way of clear communication.
Oh, yeah.
When you're feeling stressed or angry or defensive, it can be really hard to listen effectively.
Yeah. And it can be really hard to communicate effectively as well.
Yeah, you might say things that you regret later, or you might just shut down completely.
Right. And so the notes suggest using a technique called delayed response.
Okay, what's that?
So if you're in a conversation and you start to feel those strong emotions bubbling up,
Yeah.
take a moment before you react.
Take a pause.
Exactly.
Breathe.
Yes, breathe.
Don't just blurt out the first thing that comes to mind.
Exactly. Give yourself a chance to process what you're feeling and then respond in a more measured way.
I love that. It's like you're creating a little bit of space between the stimulus and the response.
Exactly.
And that space can make all the difference.
It can.
Now, there's a concept in the notes that I found really fascinating,
Okay.
and it's this idea of protagonist syndrome.
Ah, yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so protagonist syndrome, It's basically this unconscious tendency to see yourself as the main character in every interaction.
Okay.
It's like you're so focused on your own perspective and your own experience that you kind of lose sight of the fact that other people have their own valid perspectives and experiences.
So it's like you're the star of the show and everyone else is just a supporting character.
Exactly.
Okay. I can see how that would be a problem.
Yeah.
What are some signs that someone might have protagonist syndrome?
Well, one of the biggest signs is that they tend to dominate conversations.
Okay.
They're always steering the conversation back to themselves.
Yeah, right, right.
You know, no matter what you're talking about, they always have a story that starts with, oh, that reminds me of the time when I...
Yeah. And they just take over the conversation. You can't get a word in edgewise?
Exactly.
Okay, so that's one sign. What are some other signs?
They might also dismiss or minimize other people's feelings
Okay.
if those feelings don't align with their own narrative.
Right.
They might also assume that everyone else understands their emotions and their intentions without them having to actually communicate them clearly.
So it's like they think they're being transparent,
Right.
but they're not.
They're not.
And that can lead to a lot of misunderstandings.
It can't.
So how do we overcome protagonist syndrome?
Well, the notes offer a few different strategies. One is to really try to shift from a main character mindset to a shared story mindset.
Oh, okay.
So reminding yourself that everyone else has their own rich inner world,
Just like you do.
just like you do. Everyone's the protagonist of their own story.
It's about recognizing that you're just one character
Yeah.
in a much larger ensemble cast.
Exactly.
What are some other strategies?
Another strategy is to ask more questions than you speak.
Oh, okay.
So instead of jumping in with your own thoughts and experiences, try asking questions like, how did that make you feel? Or what was that like for you?
Right.
You're really trying to understand the other person's perspective.
You're actively shifting the focus away from yourself.
Exactly.
I like that.
What else? The notes also suggest checking for signs of conversational imbalance.
Okay. How do you do that?
After you have a conversation with someone, just take a moment to reflect.
Okay.
Did you listen as much as you spoke?
Right.
Did you ask thoughtful questions? Or were you mostly just sharing your own thoughts and experiences?
Oh, that's a good point. I think that's something that we could all probably do a little bit more of. Just taking a moment to reflect on how we showed up in a conversation.
I think so too.
Okay. What are some other strategies?
Well, the notes also talk about the importance of practicing perspective taking.
Oh.
So when you're in a disagreement with someone, try to step outside of your own viewpoint and imagine how the other person might be experiencing the situation.
Okay. So putting yourself in their shoes
Exactly.
and trying to see the world from their point of view.
Right.
That's a tough one, but it's so important.
It is tough. It takes practice.
Yeah. What else?
The last strategy the notes mention is being mindful of what they call the spotlight effect.
Okay. What's that?
The spotlight effect is this tendency that we all have to believe that other people are thinking about us and our actions way more than they actually are.
Oh, yeah.
We tend to overestimate how much attention people are paying to us.
Right.
And so the suggestion is to just remind yourself that everyone is mostly caught up in their own lives and their own dramas.
Right. Everyone's got their own stuff going on.
Exactly. And recognizing that can actually help you to feel less self-conscious and more open to genuinely connecting with others.
Okay, I love that. So all of these strategies are really about shifting away from this protagonist mindset.
Exactly.
And it's about making communication less about you and more about the other person.
Yeah. And when you do that, it creates space for more balanced and meaningful connections.
Right. So I'm curious about some real-life examples.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of how communication and listening can really play out in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, history's full of great examples. For instance, leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Winston Churchill, they were masters of clear and intentional communication.
Right.
And their words really resonated with people. They inspired movements. They shaped the course of events.
And then on the flip side, there are so many examples of conflicts that have been fueled or escalated by miscommunication.
Oh, yeah.
You know, things like diplomatic failures, mistranslations, just a refusal to really listen to opposing viewpoints.
Right.
And it just shows how high the stakes can be when it comes to communication.
It really does. And then on a more personal level, think about your own workplace.
Okay.
Imagine you have two coworkers. One of them is really open and respectful when they're communicating with you.
Okay.
They're willing to have difficult conversations. They're clear about their demands and their expectations.
right.
And then you have another coworker who avoids conflict at all costs, or they react impulsively.
Okay.
Which coworker do you think is going to be more effective?
I think it's pretty clear that the one who is open and communicative is going to be much more successful in building trust,
Yes.
fostering collaboration.
Exactly. And then in our personal relationships, so much of what makes a relationship strong is the ability to really listen to your partner,
Yeah,
to make them feel heard and understood.
it's about making your partner feel seen.
Right.
And when communication breaks down, when people start talking over each other or making assumptions or not really listening,
Right.
that's when you start to see disconnection creep in.
It is.
It's so important to be able to communicate effectively with the people that we care about.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to the notes
Yeah.
because they end with some really thought-provoking reflection questions for our listeners.
Oh, yeah.
And these questions are really designed to encourage some self-reflection. So, first question, do you listen to understand
Mm-hmm.
or do you listen to respond?
That's a big one.
That's a tough one.
It is.
Next question, how do you typically communicate when you're frustrated or emotional? Are your words clear and compassionate? Or do you tend to lash out or shut down?
Another good one.
Here's another one. Are there any patterns in your communication that seem to lead to misunderstandings? Do you have certain phrases or a certain tone of voice that tends to rub people the wrong way?
Yeah. Think about that.
Okay, next question. How do you react when someone doesn't understand you? Do you patiently clarify? Or do you get frustrated and give up?
It can be so frustrating when someone doesn't get what you're saying,
Oh, it can.
but it's really important to be patient.
And the last question, this is a more positive one. When was the last time you really made someone feel heard? What did you do in that interaction that made them feel understood?
It's a good one to reflect on.
I love all of those questions.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important for us to ask ourselves these questions regularly.
Me too.
So as we close out this deep dive, can you remind us of that key takeaway about communication?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's that great communication isn't just about talking.
It's about listening,
It is. It's about understanding.
and it's about responding with clarity and care.
That's what it's all about.
That's it. And on that note, here's a final thought for you to ponder this week. How might consciously applying even just one of these communication and listening principles change a significant interaction in your life this week? Think about it, experiment with it, and see what happens. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.